Okay, so we are now live. I'm going to laugh and say I kind of feel bipolar because we're live on Facebook and live on Zoom, and I'm having to navigate that. But I fortunately have some experience on both how to navigate feeling like I have multiple personalities sometimes, and how to navigate technology these days. So,
But this time they're outside your head, so this is good.
that's true. Yeah, clinically, I appreciate that. Giving me that reframe there. So welcome everyone. I just jumped over from another session. I have a cough drop in my mouth at the moment, but just jumped over from another session we were doing this morning with my dear friend Donna Orander and the Generation W community. So if any of you are coming here after that, welcome. What a great way to start Monday morning talking about healthy humor. And with that, that's actually how I know our guest for today, Dr. Ed Dunkelblau. But that's not actually what we're talking about. And I think that's pretty cool because we do love talking about healthy humor. And certainly that may weave into our conversation today. But I know Ed, Dr. D, but I'm going to just call him Ed from now on. It's easier. I know his background is really also as a thought leader and expert in the topic for today. And I think with what's happening in the world right now, we have a lot of focus on how do we create the technology or how do we use the platforms to now create learning opportunities for people virtually. But what I feel like is we all need to slow down and take a step back and think about what creates good learning communities to start with before we think about the technology. Because I think if we get that right, or at least that's my hypothesis, if we get that right, then we can figure out what technology platform will work best to create that as we navigate our new normal. So I'm going to share with you guys here in just a moment as Ed starts telling us a little bit more about his background. I'm going to share with you a couple of links for those who are on Zoom. For those who are on Facebook Live, I will go back afterwards and I will share this with you there. But there's some great resources he has shared with us to help us understand a little bit about social and emotional learning. The work that he's done, one recently that I think was posted last week that I just started looking at and is full of resources. But I don't want you guys to go look and find those right now. I want you to just hang out and have this conversation with us. Just so that you know, we are streaming this now live because I feel like it's so timely and so relevant. I want you to have it immediately. But we will also be sharing the recording as part of our Global Stress Summit, which is going to launch April 18th. And it will be free to everyone for all time. It's not a limited time. You don't have to rush through the content. But we're going to put that up for you. You can go to globalstresssummit.com to sign up anytime you want. Don't leave now. And then you will be able to go back and watch this again and also see all of those great resources that Ed is going to share. So Ed, I know you... Trying to think of how honest I want to be here. I've met you through the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor, but what really solidified you in my mind was a presentation you did in Philadelphia, one of our conferences. We were both speaking there. And I don't remember the title of it, but it was so fascinating to me because everything you were talking about, although it was from a totally different lens than my lens, was so aligning with what I was studying through integrative neuroscience, but also just my own experience of humor and comedy and why I find it so therapeutic. So that I would love, now that I've set that up, you can kind of tell people about that presentation and some of the topics you cover, which is not necessarily what we're going to do today, but then also give us some of your backstory, because I feel like I'm just now getting to know this other side of you as this thought leader in the space of social and emotional learning.
I'm sorry, was there a question somewhere?
Okay, let me make it simple. What did you talk about in Philadelphia?
In Philadelphia, it was at the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor Conference.
Yes.
And it was titled 50 Shades of Play, where I talked about the importance of humor and laughter in developing intimacy and sexual satisfaction. And what I remember from that, well, two things. One is I remember giving a sex talk and having my sister in the audience, which was really kind of an unusual experience. And the other was the unfortunate scheduling that I was immediately following this fantastic speaker who had just the whole audience enthralled, and I knew I had to somehow capture them after she left. That speaker was Heidi Hanna,
Oh
and
no.
uh, I remember you talking about yeah, having a
That's right.
business
You wove
model.
me in, didn't you? You wove me into that somehow. Maybe that's why I liked you so much.
That must be it, because it included you.
That's funny.
Yeah, well, what I'm remembering is that you talked about the head being the CEO and the heart being the,
It's
I
actually
don't,
the other way. So the
uh,
heart, I talk about the heart as the CEO because it pays attention to mission and values, and the head being the CFO because it needs resources to stay fueled.
so it got me thinking
Oh,
about if that's the heart and that's the head. So what do the genitals do? And I realized that they were mergers and acquisitions.
oh,
So
that's right. That's right. That's
so
so funny.
that's how we got talking about that.
Well,
Um,
and so much of what you were talking about, and I think it related to humor, but to me, obviously, to the brain and the nervous system, which are connected most of the time to our genitalia, is how this kind of the kick of the discovery and the climax of finding something funny. And again, people, we're not going to stay here very long, but it all just made so much sense to me. And I think it represents how important integration is. Like the human system is really complicated, and yet in some ways there are these guiding principles that if we understand them better, then the complex doesn't feel like so big of a leap. And now that I'm actually doing this PhD in global leadership and change, and I'm studying learning theory, which I've never done before, it's actually helping me really kind of unpack how do we learn. Like I've thought about that from a neuroscience perspective of brain chemistry and structure and function, but like community and culture and diversity and just all sorts of things that go into that, feeling safe in our environments. So tell us a little bit about this other thing that you're so involved with and you've been writing more and more about with regards to social and emotional learning. And I would say, please, for all of our sakes, myself included, like be as basic and fundamental to help us kind of put the building blocks together on what that
Not a
means.
problem. Not a problem. Um, I'm a psychologist by training, and I've been working with school systems for over 30 years. When we started, it became important to teach children resilience skills, to teach children the skills that will keep them from getting into difficulty. Prior to my doing that work, I was doing clinical work, mostly with children, adolescents, and families who were hospitalized or who were seeking psychotherapy because of problems at school or at home. And what I wanted to do was find a way to keep them from seeing me, find a way to give them the sets of skills that would allow them to cope, adapt, adjust, and succeed in the world without having to struggle the way the children that I was seeing were struggling. So I started working with a colleague and friend, Maurice Elias, who is a professor at Rutgers University in New Jersey, and he's written dozens of books on the importance of social emotional learning, social emotional and character. And his work was initially academic, mine was initially clinical, and over the years we've kind of met in the middle. So now what I'm involved in, I'm director of the Institute for Emotionally Intelligent Learning, and I'm also the international coordinator of the Academy for Social Emotional Learning in Schools, which is based out of, it's a partnership between Rutgers University and College of St. Elizabeth's in New Jersey. The focus is to help teachers, help students develop these skills. But what we're also realizing is that every adult needs to develop these skills as well.
Yeah.
And by social emotional skills, I'm essentially talking about 6 or 7 different competencies. Knowing your feelings, why am I feeling this way, and how do I resist my impulses is one of those. Another is realizing that we are social beings and that we need to recognize the feelings and experiences of others. So we have to be able to empathize, and we have to be able to take somebody else's perspective. The third is, how do we develop good relationships And if we have differing points of view, how do we blend those? How do we get along with one another when we don't agree with everything the other person says? How do we develop and maintain hope and optimism? How do we identify our sense of purpose? Why is it we do what we do? And then how do we actually mobilize toward that purpose? Finally, how do we exercise healthy skepticism? You mentioned media, and given all of the craziness that we hear about and all the different theories and all the different perspectives, how do we teach everyone to question what they hear in a healthy way, and to try to get beyond just being trusting and understand what's being said and matching it to data and fact checking and so on and so forth? And finally, given all those things, if we're able to do all that, how do we make good and healthy choices and decisions? Does that answer your question?
Totally. And now it tells me why I wanted to talk to you as much as I did. And I'm so grateful that you just said yes and didn't ask for a lot of explanation of why or what we would be doing with everything that's going on. You know, I'm sure you are as well, just in a bit of survival mode of trying to find the best ways to support people. And so I'm really relying on my friends and colleagues that I just like intimately know and trust. And I'm like, I know we need this and let's just figure it out. So thank you, first of all, for that. Second of all, any of our group who has gone through our stress mastery professional training is going to hear how aligned that is. I mean, we talk about 3 steps of assess, appreciate, and adjust, for a very simplistic way of how do we use the energy stresses providing me to fuel positive change instead of being hijacked and into, you know, what so oftentimes leads to anxiety and all of those sorts of things. So with this, as you're talking about that, I'm like, oh yeah, well, that's assessing, and okay, that's appreciating, and now there's the adjustment. And so I love what you're talking about, knowing your feelings, knowing each other's perspective, developing relationships, and how do we navigate that when we don't agree? I mean, each of these is so important. So how, I always want to get straight to, because I know people want this as well, like how do we do that? Like, obviously there's training, there's a lot we need to learn about this, but I guess for our group, we know that there's people who are educators, coaches, consultants, healthcare practitioners, business leaders. Obviously just knowing these things are important is a good first step. What do you think is the most important kind of first step?
To be mindful, to understand what you do, how you do it, and to actually be intentional. I think most of us do this most of the time, and or else we would have no good relationships, we would have no success at work or at school, and we certainly would be horrible parents. And most of us are not. Most of us are good people, good work, good parenting. So we've got a lot of these things going for us already. The issue becomes, in high stress times, how intentional are we in making sure we're doing what we're doing? I liken it to, I was just talking to my trainees, I train psychologists, and I was talking about all of these old World War II submarine movies, where there was always a scene in these movies where they were avoiding the enemy on the surface, and the submarine has to dive deeper than it's ever supposed to go. And as they go deeper and there's more pressure, then the rivets start to pop and there are leaks popping everywhere, and everybody's scrambling just to kind of keep the water from the outside from coming inside. And when we're in high stress times, some of the things we know and some of the things we typically do fall away as we kind of revert back to reactive style. And that's what can get us in trouble. And that's what the present sheltering at home can be for some people. Now, for some people, it's better. It's a relief. If work was a primary source of difficulty and stress, and not spending enough time with loved ones was an issue, this may not be a problem. But for others of us who thrive on routine and like going to work and really value the social connectedness of work or wherever we would tend to go, you know, kids going out to community events or activities, it does tend to add to the pressure. It does tend to increase the challenge of maintaining social emotional competence at home.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of us who are introverts who are kind of like feeling some relief right now that we get to just stay in our corner office at home and not go out. And that said, I can say, as I hear you saying this now, I'm more socially connected right now than I think I have ever been, even with physical distance, because I'm not running around so much. I'm not traveling. I'm not exhausted by what that was doing. And even yesterday, hosting Zoom birthday parties for my husband. I mean, we've never had the entire family together at one time catching up, and the conversations are going to a whole nother level. So I do think that there is possibility in that, but I also know a lot of people, especially dealing with kids at home, how different that is for them, especially at that particular age.
Yeah,
So what are
two
your
things there.
thoughts? Yeah.
One is this whole concept of social distancing. I really don't like the term.
Yeah.
I much prefer physical distancing because, in fact, as you mentioned earlier, with technology, we can make many, many social connections. They're not the social connections of being face to face, but in fact, as you're saying, you might be reaching out to people that you haven't reached out to in a while, and that's not a bad thing at all. The other element is that children, even up through high school, we'll say students, uh, get a lot of their social emotional training or development, let's say, at school. They get it at home and they get it at school. And now that school is not happening for almost everyone in the country, it has to start, it can't be stopped. And in fact, it can regress if we're not paying attention to it. So now if parents are now the teachers and parents are now the homeschoolers, they need to be intentional about not only teaching math, reading, history, and science and gym, but also making sure that those social emotional skills are continuing to develop.
And in fact, it sounds like from that standpoint, and I always am careful when I say things like this because I'm not a parent. So I know there's a lot of challenges I will never fully understand, but it does feel like in some ways having maybe a bit more control over that as a parent of how you can be more intentional, because we know, for example, I mean, teachers are amazing. I originally went to college to be a teacher. I wanted to be a high school teacher, guidance counselor, because I wanted to help kids like me who were really struggling. And I know how important it is to have that adult champion in your life. But I'm thinking now, like teacher, I mean, it's such a burden for teachers to have to be trying to control all of that and lectures and homeworks and administrative tasks that, you know, as that's moving more into the home now, maybe we can slow down and be more intentional.
I hope so. I've talked about this odd environment we're in right now as being slow time. That the normal is fast time. That we have schedules and we have to prioritize because we can't get everything done, and so on and so forth. And all of a sudden, the world has slowed us down. And one of the things it's allowed is an intentionality of how we want to spend our time. What is it we want to do? I mean, the jokes are, yeah, I never got around to cleaning my house because I was so busy. Now I'm not busy, but I realized that it wasn't time that was the issue. I just don't want to do it.
Okay.
So it's some awareness of those things that will add to the joy of learning about ourselves in this very, very different environment.
It's funny you say that because my experience has been so different. I found myself yesterday for probably the second or third week pulling clothes out of a pile to try to figure out what I could put on since it really only matters from here up. I've got pajama bottoms on, right? In fact, these are pajamas, I'll be honest. But, and I thought, man, you know, are other people dealing with this? And then it hit me, not everyone is a virtual first responder who studies stress in the brain. So probably not everybody is feeling quite the same pace. Like my pace has been faster from that perspective. But I think what it's also doing is the reality of the situation is saying, but is that how I want to spend my time? So I find myself now, like with some of the clients and people going, let's take a step back because actually this is not healthy right now. Whereas in the past, I probably would have powered through that side of things. So I think what you're bringing to light here is maybe even in both situations, we get a bit of a reality check of like, what is most important to us? How do we want to spend our time? Whether we have a lot going on and we're trying to slow down, or we don't have much going on and we want to be productive with that time. There's kind of a gut check. And I would think even with parents and their kids, if they're at home and they're trying to school them and that kind of stuff, it's also a good time to slow down and be purposeful about that.
I'm really, you make a good point. I'm really curious to see what happens once the bulk of this experience has passed.
Yeah.
Because on the one hand, I can see that everyone, even the people who resisted it, the people who were clueless about technology, will be more familiar and more comfortable with technology. So I think there'll probably be more working from home than there was before. There'll probably be more Zoom reach outs than there were before. But I think there's something else that's likely to happen as well. My experience of people is that in us in the social emotional world have been fighting or challenging people to not lose track of the connectedness, to not lose track of the importance of relationships and face-to-face as well as technological contact. And one of the things I know is that one great way to get people to want something more is to tell them they can't have it. And right now we're telling them they can't have face-to-face group togetherness. So I anticipate that along with a comfort and familiarity with technology, once this wave has lessened, is likely to be a renewed valuing of connectedness, face-to-face contact, physical closeness, just the joy of human touch. And so I think that we need to, as professionals, position ourselves to really facilitate that as well.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And there's so many things. I love talking with you, first of all, and we should do this more often. But I think I say that every time I talk to you. There's a couple things. Number one is I've been sick this is going on my 6th week and my health is better. And I keep telling people I'm doing better, I'm doing better. But when I got sick, I literally said, I have 3 days to be sick. So I got on the couch, I did everything I knew. And it was like, after that, I'm going back to work. And it wasn't because I had to, I wanted to. I have like the best year planned this year. I was doing the most exciting things ever. So that was hard to like push through and then see what ended up happening. And the other thing is I run almost every day for my mental health, and I have not been able to. The one time I did, I shouldn't have, it was too soon, and I got really, really sick. So now, like, navigating that differently, I just keep thinking, wow, when I can actually work out again, I'm going to be so grateful. This coming from someone who as a child was like, didn't want to walk a block. So that's been interesting to see and appreciate that. But the other thing it makes me think about, and I'd be so curious to your opinion on this, is what about all the screen time? Because I've always been concerned about the amount of screen time that people have in general. And I don't know if this is something you've thought as much about, but I notice now that everything's happening on screens. While we can't necessarily go out and play with all the kids, the neighborhood and that kind of stuff, I still feel like we need to be careful that we're not over-activating, over-stimulating these developing brains, and being really creative and thoughtful about how we get them to learn away from the computer. And that's, I mean, I'm even talking to my Pepperdine and Harvard colleagues about like, how do we do this? Because I'll tell you, I had 4 days of classes when all of this first went down at Pepperdine. I did from my hotel outside of Los Angeles. And we did normal school, which for us in these intensive days are 8 in the morning until 9 o'clock at night. And I was sick and I was in the hotel and I was looking at a screen hour after hour after hour. And one of the things I've noticed is that teachers teaching online try to put the same amount of content, maybe even more. So now we're working through breaks. We're not standing and getting outside. It was so intense. I felt so much worse afterwards versus what I think we have the opportunity to do is be creative? How do we get people outside, or using experiential learning in the house by having them go do something, a craft, or I don't know, what do you, I mean, I think this is, again, an issue we had before, perhaps, that now is going to be magnified, but gives us an opportunity to do it different. Does that make sense? My questions are long.
Yeah.
I realize that.
I kind of heard 3 or 4 questions in there.
Pick whichever one you like.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of screen time.
Yeah.
And I think my experience of the increased amount of screen time, because certainly you and I are both experiencing that as well, is that it facilitates getting work done in many ways. It facilitates, I mean, it's remarkable to me that during these days, I can get hold of people. They're not so scheduled or so or, you know, you and I both spend a lot of time in airplanes where it can't be gotten hold of. So in some regards, there are opportunities, screen or not screen related. And I think that screens are pretty good at addressing the cognitive elements of our experience, our thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And to some degree, they're even pretty good at addressing the affective, the emotional elements of our experience. I mean, I read things, I watch stuff I watch memes of one form or another that just bring tears to my eyes. They're so wonderful, they're so heartfelt, or they're so kind, or you know, just show me golden retriever puppies and I'm a basket case.
Yeah.
What's missing is the human connection, the physical human connection, the relationship based upon proximity, and also the kinesthetic learning that goes on through movement, through touch, and through the experience of non-filtered color. I think those are cognitive, emotional, behavioral experiences that can't be duplicated by screen. You know, once we have holodecks and 3D experiences, I think technology is going to make more use of those as well, but we ain't there yet.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, Star Trek does not exist in the real world yet. I think there are limitations to screen experience, but I think there are also opportunities that we're just now beginning to maximize.
Yeah. Well, certainly at the Brain Health Initiative, this is something we've been looking at for a long time, is augmented reality. So what's happening in the brain as we learn and move at the same time. And people like Adam Gazzaley in San Francisco has an amazing lab. And what tends to happen is we find out about it and then we all want it. And it just takes a while for us to figure out what really works and make sure that, you know, things are able to be integrated into the classroom and into the home.
There's another element to that I think is really important that I don't hear talked about very much. And that's the development of the ethical support for what's being done. That not as much airtime, at least not that I'm hearing, is about the values and moral meaning of being able to do these things. I mean, my bias is just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do it.
Yep.
And I don't hear yet the development of what our ethical guidelines are around all of these things. I mean, we hear a little bit about privacy. We hear a little bit about how old should someone be to be exposed to X, Y, and Z. But I also don't hear what our moral center is and what we should be doing for the good of our communities, for the good of our society, for the good of our world. We're a global community now.
Yeah.
And how do we support not only ourselves, our work, our communities, but the larger whole? It's a mistake to think that something that happens halfway around the world won't impact us. And boy, did we get that in spades all of a sudden.
Boy, did we. And I'm happy to say that this program that I feel like I just kept trying to logically say, why am I doing this? When I went back to school this fall and went to Pepperdine for global leadership and change is exactly what we're looking at. Those are the conversations we're having. In fact, Ed, I'm going to give your information to our faculty there, because I think this brings a great question, and your background would be wonderful for us as students to continue to discuss. So I think the conversations are happening in some small circles, but when I think about that question, there's almost two components of it. It's what is the information that we think is most important, and then what's the vehicle or the mechanism, right, that we then start to weave that into. And we've had a lot of debate in our class alone about who chooses what those are, because we know there's differences of opinions of just what morals, what ethics, all of that kind of stuff we should lean into. So bigger conversation.
It is a bigger conversation, and I think it's fraught with landmines also. So it's one that has to be entered in delicately. But I think everybody can agree that we want to raise children of good character.
Yes.
We want children to do good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if we use that as the compass,
Mm-hmm.
if we help our students make good choices, healthy choices, community supportive choices, I think that building kindness and compassion, I doubt there are very few people are saying, nah, boy, I hope my child doesn't have any of that.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think there are some things that we can agree on. And when I talk about ethical and moral center, I'm not talking about religion. I'm not talking about religious values. I'm really talking about the basic core values that all of us can agree on.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for making that point. It reminds me of when I'm teaching people about nutrition and they want to ask me about organic or, artificial sweeteners or different things. And I always say, like, there's certain basic things you're not doing. And once you do, then I'm happy to talk about that. But I do think that sometimes it's almost the stress hijack that happens. We're so concerned about offending someone about all of these lofty ideas that we don't put out these important, basic, fundamental, universal truths of what we just all should be paying more attention to. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. A good friend of mine, Sue Stevenson, who you know as well, she's in our AATH group, does a lot of study around this area. And one of the things that she mentioned is the type of learning and experience that can happen actually when we're not trying to be logical. So she calls it spaced out learning. I don't know if you've heard that before, but just kind of that, or my friend Srini Pillai, who will also be part of our summit, he's got a book. And in fact, he spoke at our conference in San Diego. I know you were there. Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try, about the power of the unfocused mind. That yes, we need to be focused and learn information, but we also need to rest, relax, play, have humor for transformation to happen. So I'm going to try again to go, here's one question, because that could go in a lot of different directions. But you use play and humor and things like that and weave that into social emotional learning. So how does that fit in, do you think, right now?
Oh, you just summarized it so well. A lot of our thinking is linear. A lot of our linear logic plays into the work that we do. And it gets us from A to B. I mean, there's a reason that it's linear. But I find I am most creative when I'm not thinking linearly. I am most innovative when I have to think in new and interesting ways. The cliche is thinking outside the box. And actually, that reminds me, years ago, I was at a hotel where they had a conference going on, and the theme of the conference was thinking outside the box. Now, ordinarily, I wouldn't have paid attention to that, except when I realized that the conference was the International Meeting for Funeral Directors. And it was just a brilliant way to talk about marketing funerals. So I think that for me, I get some of my best ideas in the shower. When my mind is wandering, when I'm not thinking about anything in particular, or when I'm watching something funny or engaged with friends in fun, playful funny, laughter-filled ways.
Mhm.
I have a friend, Chuck Jones, who talks about that there was this theory, and I don't remember, it might have been Thomas Aquinas, who said that the brain is like a charcoal that burns brightly or dully from time to time.
Mm.
And what Chuck Jones says is that what humor and laughter is it's like a cool breeze that blows away the ash that
Mm.
allows the charcoal to burn more brightly. And
Love
it's a
that.
great vision, a great image. So I really think that being in, it almost sounds like a paradox, but being intentional about playing, being
Mhm.
intentional about not being intentional,
Mhm.
is really helpful. And a way to do that is to just schedule it.
Yeah.
You're intentional about time, but not intentional about intent and action.
Yeah.
Uh, so I really think that humor, laughter, and play, the aath.org is a great place for people to find those kinds of ideas and suggestions, and maybe even join this incredible organization.
Yeah.
So I hope I'm answering your question.
Yeah, you are. And once again, we're on the same page. I literally just wrote down next to me strategic recovery, because I've talked about that for a long time from an energy management perspective for personal health and recovery and recharge, and that everything about the human system is supposed to oscillate. That was that brilliant talk I was giving before your lecture in Philadelphia, I think, but I digress. So it was just, heartbeats, brain waves, blood sugar, everything's supposed to oscillate, and a flat line's always bad. And so how do we then think about our day that way? And I was writing that down because another thing, because so much of my work is focused on corporations and organizations who are so strategic about every little thing, is I tell them that if you're strategic, if you put the word strategic in front of something, you can get away with pretty much anything. So for over 10 years, I've strategically been getting a massage once a week. And, that may sound really far-fetched to people, but I can tell you if I don't do that, I am not the person I want to be. I'm not as effective, as efficient. I'm not able to do what I do. In fact, other than not running, not getting my massage for 6 weeks has been really tough. So I'm being creative about hot baths and stretching and some different things. In fact, I'm probably getting a massage chair, non-expensive one, but just like we had to get a small elliptical machine. It's like, okay, do the things that are most important right now. So I
I
wrote that down.
strategically eat chocolate.
What's that? Eat chocolate?
I
Totally.
strategically eat chocolate, yes.
I have a sign in here. It says stay calm and carry chocolate.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not saying sit on the couch and have too many bonbons or whatever, but that idea of what do we need in that oscillation is so important. And so I wrote that down. I was going to actually come back and ask you, other than scheduling it, which I know is important, are there other things you could think of that would help parents, educators, coaches, counselors, whoever might be here, actually be more purposeful about getting play and humor into their day?
Yeah, I would expand the question,
Please do.
because in fact, I'll strategically expand the question.
Thank you.
I would suggest that there are things, this is an opportunity. Right?
Mhm.
It's a pain in the neck in so many ways. It's such a disruption in so many ways that it's really a challenge to find the opportunities. But one of the opportunities is for parents and children, or parents and teenagers, or teenagers and children, or teenagers and teenagers, to practice and develop their connectedness skills, their relationship skills.
Mhm.
Some of those are to make sure that while you're doing this stuff, you're having fun. So doing things that are fun at home become a piece of it. But there's an opportunity in something as simple as doing a board game, is to do it in a way that develops their social emotional competence. So working as teams, having to decide if they're doing quiz games, having to decide what the right answer is, how are they going to make those decisions. With younger kids, just reading to them, but rather than just reading the story, stopping and asking, so what do you think about this character? What do you like about them? What don't you like about them? They had this problem. What would you have done in that situation? So to take the fun things that we do, but to use them as opportunities to also ask questions. Ask questions about relationships, ask questions about making decisions, ask questions about feelings. How do you think this person's feeling? Or what was it, when you lost the game, what was that like for you? How did it feel? Or when your brother won the game, how did that feel? Or what do you think he was feeling, or she, if your sister was feeling? So to really take play and make it playful and fun, but also uses opportunities for curiosity and discussion.
Oh, I love that. Once again, I wrote down the word curiosity because it's one of my favorite things. And I think along with humor and play and having more fun, when I put on a lens of curiosity, I just find instant relief. So it's no longer about, I need to fix this, but it's, what's the lesson? What's in this for me? What could I be grateful for right now? And in the really hard times when I just feels like I can't come up with anything positive, I think, how might this help me help someone else someday? And then it's suddenly like, I don't have to try to solve it immediately. And certainly I think in times like this right now, putting on the lens of like, life is an experiment. I just, that makes it feel more like we can take more chances or do more things or even have more self-compassion for ourselves. And you mentioned that, that I think is I know for me, it's been one of the most important things I've started doing is self-compassion practices. Do you know if that's something that's also being kind of weaved into like curriculum or kind of with younger people? Are we starting to teach that more?
Sure. I don't know that I would call it self-compassion as much as reflection and accurate understanding, softening the self-talk, doing less self-criticism. And one of the things I stress in working with my trainees is curiosity, not criticism.
Yeah.
So often in this world, much less just in our communities, is everybody is explaining things. Everybody is telling. Parents are telling. And I really encourage everyone to tell less and ask more, to ask more curious questions, get to know the person's point of view as opposed to having to explain yours. And I think there's a real value in parenting. There's a real value in teaching. There's a real value in corporate work, in the corporate world, to ask more questions.
Yeah.
By asking more questions, we tend to understand better. We have closer connected relationships. Other people feel heard and understood. We can take perspective more easily. And we tend to build our own level of confidence because we understand more and we get to know ourselves better as well.
That feels like such an important point to start to wrap this up, because I could obviously talk to you about this all day. And I want to say, for those of you who have not met Ed before, you really walk this talk. Like, as you're saying, ask questions, there's this little bit of like comfort. And I know people will say, well, he's so comfortable and confident in his speaking tone. You have that kind of clinical lay down on a couch and tell you all my problem side, but you also ask a lot of questions, so it's always, I feel like I have to up level my game a little bit in a conversation with you. And I appreciate that about you, because if I'm not really clear, or even my questions that ramble for a while, because I tend to talk and think at the same time, is to say, okay, what was the question in that? Or how can I be most helpful to you right now? Like, I think it's important to ask that. It's also a sign of deep presence. So if we just assume that we know what someone wants for us, sometimes we're having two different conversations, and you really bring it back to, how can I be helpful right now? So I think that's something that we can all really learn from you, and you've modeled it as well as telling us you've been modeling it. And I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for saying that. I'm genuinely interested in people's experience, in their story. I'm not good at small talk. So I mean, the fact that you think and speak at the same time is such a pleasure compared to those that just speak.
Mm.
And don't seem to think.
I'm
So,
trying.
so yeah, I encourage people to be curious about those that they love and care about, to
Mm.
be available to them, to be generous, to be compassionate, to see the world through their eyes, to understand their life story, and then to share their own.
Mm. That's so beautiful. I would love everyone to take, if nothing else, away from this, just that idea of listening more deeply to each other with the perspective of trying to understand, not to question. I mean, you mentioned kind of healthy, I don't remember the word you used, but skepticism. So asking questions and being okay, having the safety to challenge ideas, think openly, but also to really try to put yourself in other people's shoes and understand their perspective, even if you don't agree with it. I feel like you would be a healthy debater of ideas, because you probably have strong ideas and opinions about things, but also can be respectful in having a conversation and kind of agreeing to disagree. Does that ever happen to you? Do you ever agree to disagree?
Uh, I'm also fairly tenacious, so that's not an easy position for me to be in. As you were talking, it reminded me, I had a mentor when I was in training, a psychiatrist named Leo Jacobs, and he had a great line. He said, "People have a need to know,
Mm.
but only a willingness to think."
Mm.
And I thought that kind of sums up where we should move. We should move toward a need to think through things, a need to understand.
Yeah. And maybe know that it may take a little while. It's not a quick fix. You know, even with the circumstances we're in, I gave myself 3 days to be sick, and my body was like, haha, that's what you think, you know? I think we want to
But
rush through this and fix it, but we're going to learn a lot through this process.
yeah, yeah,
Do you think we can be better as a result of what we're going through?
absolutely. I don't think we have a choice.
Hmm.
I think that it's human nature and the human condition to adapt and improve.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we will find ways to adapt and improve. And in many ways, I see this whole pandemic response as kind of an ecological reboot. And what it's done, there's this meme that comes up on my Facebook page that shows a picture of Los Angeles without smog. That
Hmm.
it's
Wow.
been 3 weeks now without smog.
Wow.
There are cities in China where the air quality has never been so good. The canals in Venice are clear, where they have porpoises swimming through, or dolphins, I forget which, swimming through the canals. They were fish. So ecologically, from a nature standpoint, this seems to be somewhat of a reboot. I think it can be for us as well.
Mm-hmm.
Economically, it's going to be a challenge. And there's going to be a lot of people who need help and support.
Yeah.
And psychologically, it's going to be a challenge, because this is going to have a lot of, there's going to be a lot of stress reactions to their experiences now and when this passes. But I think we've always come together, and I think that community, relationships, connection become more important in those times, and that's what we can learn here.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. So we are going to post links to the articles and resources and such that you have shared. So we'll make sure that those are there. But also, would you just tell people where they can get more information about you? Is there an easy kind of quick thing, or is it best to go after the links? Because you've got some long links here, which is good.
Yeah. It's brevity is not my strongest pitch. If you ever need to get hold of me, the easiest thing to do is to email me. It's ed@teacheq.com, teacheq.com.
Awesome.
Do have a website, but sometimes people who try to get me through the website don't get through. Other places, certainly the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor website, aath.org, is important. selandschools.org is really an important one, especially for teachers or parents who have become teachers in this
Yeah.
circumstance. So there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of good support, a lot of good help, and I encourage people to sift through and find the ones that speak to them.
Thank you so much. Well,
Thanks, Heidi.
this has been fascinating, and I know I want to ask you more questions. So we'll tell everyone who's watching that we will be inviting Ed into more conversations, especially for those of you who are going to continue on to this kind of virtual first responder initiative that we have going, because we all bring different skill sets. And I think if I've learned anything through the last 6 weeks, it has been that for me to go out and try to help everybody as much as I want to is not sustainable. That we really have to take a step back and be intentional, know what our strengths are, but also know what we find fun. Like that's been a huge aha for me is, yes, I could do a lot of things, but what really recharges me while I'm doing it. And I found it's honestly conversations like this with brilliant people where I just get to be curious and ask questions. I get to learn, and I know it's going to be helpful for other people. So that's what this initiative is really about, is for all of us that want to serve better together right now, how do we do that and be thoughtful about that? And obviously Ed has a lot of really great information and experience that will help us. So I put you on the spot a little bit, but I hope you'll come back and chat with me again.
Absolutely.
I promise to ask the best questions I can and keep them a little shorter next time. So with that, everyone, thank you so much for checking out this session. I hope you enjoy the rest of the summit experience, and we'll be back again really soon. So bye for now.
Okay, bye-bye.